Good morning, or perhaps good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar. We're thrilled to have Bells Brewery's demand forecasting team, Blake Violette, Caleb Livingston, and Brendan Farrell, here today to talk about how Bells Brewery improved their supply planning with Forecast Pro. My name is Sarah Darren, and I will be today's moderator. Before we get started, I want to run through a few logistics about how we run the webinar. The webinar will run 45 or 50 minutes, and we'll have some time for questions at the end. During the webinar, you may submit questions using the control panel on your screen. You can submit questions at any time during the webinar, including when we actually get to the Q&A session. We'll be monitoring these questions throughout the webinar and compile a list for Bells Brewery to answer during the Q&A session. We'll try to take as many questions as possible, but if we don't get to your question, don't worry. We'll send you a follow-up email with a reply at the conclusion of the webinar. We will also be taping this webinar, and we will email you a link to the video as well as to a PDF version of the slides next week. The video will also be posted on our website along with those slides. Incidentally, we also have an archive of prior webinars available on the website, forecastpro.com, and we encourage you to watch any of the previous webinars you may have missed. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Blake, Caleb, and Brendan.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining today. We've been a customer of Forecast Pros for about 3 years now, so we're going to walk you through some of the tips and tricks we've used to help integrate the software into our process and how it's helped improve some of our metrics. So let's get started. All right, so we are Bells Brewery. We're in the United States in Southwest Michigan and Kalamazoo. Yes, there really is a city called Kalamazoo. So what you're looking at here is an aerial image of our brewery. So we make craft beer. I know there's a lot of people from around the world on the call today, so I think the craft beer trend has been taking off globally in the last 10 years. So you're probably familiar with some of the specialty type of products that we make. But we're one of the larger craft breweries in the United States. We employ right around 550 people. We make about 15.5 million gallons of beer annually. So we actually measure things in something called a beer barrel, which is 31 gallons, and it's about 500,000 barrels of beer for those familiar with the industry. And we've been in business for about 35 years. And we are 100% family owned and independent. So we're not a subsidiary of a larger company. We were founded in, like I said, 35 years ago in 1985 by our Larry Bell, who's still our president. And we are the 7th largest craft brewery out of, and I think there's over 9,000 breweries in the United States now. So definitely in the upper percentile of size of breweries for craft breweries here in the United States. All right, so we are the forecasting team. So there, I don't know if you follow a lot about forecasting, there's always talk about, where's the best place to put your forecasting team within your industry. A lot of the times it falls in supply chain or somewhere else, but we fall in the sales and marketing area. And we actually live in a team called Business Insights. So we have analysts and that cover a lot of things like sales analytics and operational analytics, but we are specific facet of the team that does specifically do forecasting. So we do forecasting and demand planning. And we also lead the sales and operations planning efforts at the company. So I'm Blake. I'm the manager. I oversee forecasting and sales and operations planning. I've worked in beer for 7 years, but I have a total of about 11 years of industry experience. I started out in engineering, General Electric. And then I moved on to my passion of craft beer, where I've worked in supply chain and warehouse procurement operations and supply chain distribution, as well as now almost 4 years dealing solely with forecasting and demand planning. I got my master's degree from Penn State here in the United States in supply chain, undergrad from Tennessee in statistics, and really found a home working in craft beer doing what I love with data and supply chain and analytics. So it's been a great ride. I also brought with us today our forecasting analysts who are on the team, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Caleb Livingston. I'm one of the forecast analysts here at Bells. I've been in the beer business pretty much my whole working life now, 9 years after I got out of school. Started out at a small brewery doing operations management and supply planning. Now here at Bells doing demand planning and forecasting. Have my bachelor's in business management from Simpson College in Indianola, Iowa, here in the U.S., and my MBA from Western Michigan University.
And then, hello everyone, I'm Brendan Farrell. I have my undergraduate and graduate degree from Western Michigan University, based here in the Kalamazoo, Michigan. So I spent just under 5 years as an actuarial technician for a regional insurance company. And then just, living in Kalamazoo, Michigan, Bells is a huge proponent of the city. And so attending Western, I naturally always kind of had an eager to work there, and finally jumped ship to go into the craft beer industry. So I've had about 8 years of analytics and about 3 years in the beer industry.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, so I think when setting out to build this team, we wanted to have a well-rounded team, and I think that's important for any forecasting organization. We've got Brendan, who's our resident math whiz, and we've also got Caleb, who does a great job at kind of integrating what we do into the business and taking that business approach. So I think that's a good first step when you're looking at building a forecasting team, is making sure you got good, well-rounded individuals on the team who are passionate about your products. Speaking of our products, here's some of, if you live in the United States and one of the territories that we distribute in, you might be familiar with some of our products here. So the main one here is Two Hearted Ale. That's the main driver, the highest percentage of our business, and it's an American style IPA. And then there's kind of this industry voting from the American homebrewers that goes on, that's kind of respected within the industry. And we've had the best beer in the United States for 3 years in a row. So that's really helped boost sales. We've done some promotions and things around that. So that puts challenge on the forecasting as well, but it's a great brand for us. We also have a beer called Oberon that comes out in the summer. It's a wheat ale. It's a really drinkable, nice beer, really refreshing. It goes great, when it's hot outside. We've got some new brands, Lighthearted and Official, a couple IPAs that have come out recently. New brands that have fallen into the number 3 and number 4 brands for the company. So when you talk about new product launches and trying to forecast those, when you have ones that are this large and falling in that top slot, it definitely poses some challenges as well. And then another beer for us that's kind of like a specialty brand that gets released annually is Hop Slam Ale. You might be familiar with that. It's a double IPA, gets released in January. So hopefully you're familiar with some of these products, some of these brands, if you're familiar with the industry. But what I wanted to display here was the variety of packaging. So we have over 400 active brands and thousands of active products. So SKUs are our products, and you can see any one particular type of beer could go into many, many different types of packaging. So that makes it challenging when forecasting and when planning supply. So it's one area where picking up some software to help us do that forecasting has really assisted us in increasing forecast accuracy on all the different products that we offer. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about our downstream supply chain. It's pretty standard, but the one caveat in the alcohol industry in the United States is that we are not allowed to self-distribute to retail. So there's a taxation system in place where all of the distributors who distribute our beer to retail have to be separate from our company. So it's called the 3-tier system. So a little bit kind of overview of our supply chain here. I think of supply chain as 2 different facets. As you have your physical flow of materials, and that's kind of the traditional view of it, but I also view the flow of information as a supply chain in itself as well, which is really important for forecasting, so I'll talk about that too. So we have one production facility. We actually have 3 different breweries at the production facility, but all the beer that we make and distribute comes from the one location from that picture I showed from the first slide. And from there, we distribute to 185 different distributors. And that's good and fine if they're all internal and you can control the data. But like I said, these are all third-party distributors. So it makes it challenging when trying to figure out your sales and your metrics going from distribution to retail. But we've got some companies in place to help us out with that. But you can imagine the challenges of dealing with 185 different independent distributors out of one production facility. So from our distributors, the beer gets, the inventory gets depleted into retail locations. And throughout the United States, through our territories, we have over 70,000 retail locations that scan our beer. So some of the popular ones, if you live in the United States again, are shown here. They may or may not be in an order of volume, but I'll let you figure that out. But so a lot of our beer goes through these channels. But still a significant portion of our beer, most of the beer actually, goes through independent channels. So your mom and pop liquor stores, your bar down the street, they don't necessarily report every pint that they pour to Nielsen or IRI. So that's a big chunk of missing data. So we can't necessarily do comprehensive forecasting at the retail level. So we're kind of got our hands tied there. So where we mainly do our forecasting is from our production facility to distributors, and we call those shipments, and we control that data. That's from our ERP. And then from our distributor to retail, we get 100% of that data as well through a third-party data processor. So that brings us down to the flow of information, which is an important part of the supply chain as well. So like I said, one production facility, we have an ERP where we log invoice level detail that we can use that data as historic data for shipment forecasting. And then distributor to retail, we call those depletions, inventory depletions from our distributors. And we have a third-party data processor who collects 100% of that information for us as well. And they actually do a lot of cleanup on it. And we complain to them a lot, but it's actually pretty good data. It's, I would say it's close to 99% accurate. And when you're talking forecasting, that's basically good enough to get a good accurate forecast off of. So even farther downstream from that, from retail to our beer drinkers, our actual end consumers, we do collect that syndicated data, and we get that through Nielsen, IRI, channels like that. And we can do some ad hoc forecasting for individual retailers, or you know, if we're curious about what's going on, we can make some assumptions that that's occurring at all the retail locations that we don't have access to. But that again only counts for, you know, under 40% of our total sales. So a big chunk of that data is missing. So where do we achieve to get some information of that is social data. So the traditional stuff that you would imagine, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, we can collect information that helps us forecast. But in the beer industry, there's a couple websites where people, you know, create accounts and they go in and check into the beers that they drink. And it's kind of a big phenomenon that's really grown in popularity the last 10 years. And Untapped is the largest one. And we have, I think I checked, it was 6.8 million unique check-ins for our brewery. Close to 1 million unique reviews of our products. So those are great resources that we can use to help determine, you know, new brands, how are they going to do, or how is a new brand doing with new check-ins and things like that. So that's some great information that helps with forecasting as well. So this is our downstream supply chains that we forecast, the physical flow, and again, the information flow, which is very important to us. So a little bit about our forecasting process. We do what is called a forecast value add process, which you do several steps throughout the forecasting process, and you measure if you're getting better or worse and figure out, you know, where the most accurate forecast was. So through that forecast value add process, we have a statistical forecast. Then we adjust it with our forecasting analyst to create a baseline forecast. And that is all done in Forecast Pro. So our statistical forecast, since we own our software, is kind of like the worst we could possibly do without any intervention. So we just load the data into Forecast Pro, let the expert selection run, and kick that back out, and that becomes kind of our statistical forecast that we can look at and measure. From there, myself and the forecast analysts on periodic basis go in and check all the models within Forecast Pro. Expert selection doesn't always pick the best model because all of the business assumptions aren't necessarily accounted for in your historic data. So we do a lot of work to pick the correct models, add some of those business assumptions in, forecasting for new products, new markets, things like that we add in, and that becomes our baseline forecast. And we hope that we improve the accuracy, which we do, so that's good. But from there, we serve that baseline forecast up to our sales team. And we have an online portal that our web developer built out for us, which connects directly to the data. It's within our firewall, so our sales team can log in, get a good graph of a good visual of their forecast and see what's going on. And they have a table of numbers as well where they can go in and adjust the forecast. So once they go in and make their adjustments, we kick that out and that becomes our final forecast. And we then integrate it into our processes through SQL and into our ERP, where we can run material requirement planning and production planning and things like that. So that's our process, and it's been working out pretty well so far. But it's always a continuous improvement. So we're always making minor tweaks. There's a lot of steps in here that aren't shown in the high-level process, but we'll go through some of those when talking about how we improve things. So the biggest part that we were going to mention today is kind of the data process evolution. So when you first pick up Forecast Pro or any kind of forecasting software, or if you're doing the open source modeling in Python or R, you have a lot of manual data movement, which takes up a lot of time. So when we first implemented Forecast Pro, this center flow here was our process. So we were querying the data with Tableau, getting it kind of in a format that we needed. We were exporting that to Excel manually. All the red lines here are manual data movements. And then we were manually importing that into Forecast Pro, performing our modeling, manually exporting all of that information into a text file, and then manually updating our SQL tables so we could load it into our ERP. And that was great to start out with, because you immediately gain some value in implementing statistical forecasting. But in order to gain more value, you need to free up some of that time. And you also run the risk of some manual data movement errors and some manual data processing errors that can occur when you're manually moving things around. So we wanted to automate that to free up time and to reduce our chance of errors. So now we have kind of an automated data flow directly between SQL and Forecast Pro and directly to our ERP. And this has been a huge time saver for us. We're not going to go into a lot today on picking the right model or how you use statistical forecasting within Forecast Pro. What we're going to talk about is how to free up time so you can spend more time doing that stuff. Our resident data expert, we've all picked up a lot of skills with moving data around, but Brendan's kind of the one who kicked us off on it. He's going to take you through some of the steps into automating some of these data flows to free up that time so you can spend more time doing what you need to do, which is improving forecasts. So Brendan, here you go.
Alrighty, thanks, Blake. So as Blake mentioned, the first part is, I think everyone here can agree, the most critical piece is the data you feed into Forecast Pro. And so we would come in and, to Blake's point, there was a query in Tableau, put it to Excel, a lot of manual touch points. So the first thing we tried to do was to get all the data prepped in a table using an SSIS job to run behind the scenes. So when we came in the morning, can you flip back, Blake? So we tried to have that job run before we even got in. So all the data was formatted and prepped and ready to be ingested by Forecast Pro when we got in. So that's alone saved time, reduce the manual touch points. The thing I want to call out here on this slide in particular, the formatting is particular. Now we use SQL Server Management Studio, and this is the formatting that's required for SQL Server Management Studio. All this can be found in the Forecast Pro user manual. And if you have questions still, I highly recommend contacting support at Forecast Pro. Abe Goldman was a big help for us getting this set up so that we could import it. So as you can see here, once we had this built out, so that cut out a ton of time. There were some manual touch point errors we actually witnessed firsthand. And getting this process built eliminated that. There was one time where just the data didn't load correctly. We didn't catch it in time, and so it flew through to production, and that created a bit of headaches for everyone involved. So this eliminated those headaches and saved us a bunch of time so we can actually spend time improving that forecast value after the baseline statistical. I think we go to the next slide. So the next step is getting everything connected to it. It's pretty easy to set up. I think Blake's going to walk you through a quick demo here of how easy it is to actually get that set up, provided you have the drivers and everything. But so you just open up Forecast Pro here, new project setup, connect your data however you want, go to Data Manager, and historical data, click on this drop down, there's ODBC outside database connection, click on that. And then if you don't have the data source set up, go to Machine Data Source, and then you can create a new one. And it's really quite simple to get it all set up. Helps to have admin rights if you want to set up a system data source. The support team at Forecast Pro can help you with more. We're not going to dive into everything to get all this set up, but so we had ours housed in SQL Server. So we just selected that driver that was we had prepared. So to go ahead and grab that, and then you can follow through the steps to connect to the database and the exact table that you wanted. So that was kind of the first big step, the first big hurdle we had towards automating all this. It's getting all this set up. The next piece, can you flip back to the slide, Blake? Then we can go ahead to the next slide. The piece we don't show there is pointing that to the right direction, which is going to be on the next slide here, making sure you have your outputs pointed to where you want to. Because the ultimate piece we're trying to achieve is to have the data reload, data prepping, the data reload, and the output kicking out all to be automated to save us time and fewer touch points there. Because some of the question we would have is, is the data updated? So we have to open it up, refresh it, and that would take a couple of minutes. And depending on how large your data set is, that can take a significant amount of time. So having that all prepped before we got in was, critical. It saved us a ton of time. So Blake already kind of walked you through the data management piece. The next step is to kind of build out the command line piece. So in the bottom left there, you can see setting some of the user settings. So if you open up the options pane and go to command line, you have some options of what all you want to execute when you run the command line. So here, Blake's going to show you live. So just go ahead and cancel out of that.
Should I show how to connect to the data first?
Sure, go for it.
I don't want to miss up an opportunity to share our dummy data source that we built. So this is how easy it is
right now,
getting connected to the data.
So we created a dummy data source to kind of show you how quickly it can be to connect to it. This is our box Drinkins ale that we have created on the back end. Sadly, not a product of Bells yet. And so you can see there it is. It's already loaded in. And you can see as we blow down through, you can see the hierarchy we built. If you go think back to that one slide, and again, this will be recorded so you can grab this. You see the item ID 01 that helps build out the hierarchy that you're going to need in order to import the data in the Forecast Pro. And Blake, can you click on options real fast? Go back and click on options. Under options, there's a command line tab, and then you can set up the settings you want to execute. So when you call out the command line operation, it'll do this. It'll specify what modifiers, what overrides you want to import, what exactly you want to export if you want to do numeric output, or item report, and override output or report. You can specify all that, and then last piece is to point it, tell it where you want to save all that, all those files. And so the next piece we had just finished completing is sending that directly back to our database, so that it's a more streamlined data pull as everything goes through. So that's kind of where the robots come in here. So now we've pointed everything, we've connected to our data automatically, the refreshes. We had told Forecast Pro where we want to set all of our data. We've set all the models and modifiers and selected what all we want to output. So the next couple steps are pretty simple. You just key up the batch script, and this batch script that we showed in there. That's all the code we have for one of the batch scripts that we run. It's very simple, easy to design. And then lastly, we just set it to automatically run using Task Scheduler there. So we set it, it'll run. So when that piece is complete, everything will run behind the scenes. And when we come in, we take a first sip of coffee, we can sit down and start analyzing the models that come in. Before, it used to be an hour plus of getting all the data around, get it wrangled, confirm it, do this, do that, and now it's ready to go for us to pop in as soon as we want to. And next slide, please. And then the last piece here, like any finely tuned machine, you have to constantly maintain and optimize it. So something we had to decide here was where the accuracy matters most. Where do we want to forecast? That's critical to our production team. So as part of the supply plans, we need to know what needs to go in what product. So a big piece of that is where do we want to forecast? Because we have it down one level below to our distributors, but the production team doesn't really care about that. They just care about how much they need a package of each product and when. And so that's where we did kind of a middle out forecast. And Blake's going to show you just real quick. You pop in there, you grab the product we want to do, right click and select top down. So that saves us some time because then we don't have to go through each of the sub level and fit the right model for it. We just fit the model at the right level where we need it. And bada bing, bada boom, all those are top down models now. And so now you're looking at updating 8 models there versus, we have 185 distributors that Blake mentioned. So 185 times 8, you can see how quickly that workload grows. And then Blake, can you flip back to the slide? And then the last couple pieces of optimization, kind of the routine maintenance or clean up some of the archive stuff. As the longer you go with Forecast Pro, it keeps logging all this data. If you don't need it, get rid of it. So you have the option to purge some of the forecast, purge some of the overrides. We don't keep them around for too long. We have another separate archiving process that we use in-house. And then lastly, there's that compact button as well. And that'll help maintain the integrity of the SQLite database that's behind the scenes. And it also helps improve performance significantly. I actually just did it this morning. It helped move things along rather quickly. And then the last piece here is we have a bunch of products that are grouped together. And initially we had it all in one big master file, and it just got to be cumbersome to connect to all that data, millions upon millions of rows of data. But we decided that through the use of the super project functionality of Forecast Pro, we split it up. And you can break it into light groups, and now all of a sudden your data is split into those groupings, so it's easier to connect to. It's much more easier to ingest instead of millions of rows every time you're trying to refresh. It's a couple 100,000, maybe even 10,000. So you quick zap it and boom, boom, boom. And now with that, you can test a bunch of different models that can recalculate a lot faster without trying to re-churn through all the data that you have in there. So that's something we executed. Forecast Pro has a functionality there. If you want to join them back and see what that unified forecast looks like, we decided to forego that, and we just do the unification in our database. So we kick all those out and rejoin that in our database as part of our process. But the super project functionality is actually pretty easy to use. It's just something that it wasn't the right fit for us. We decided to bypass that. Again, if you have any questions, I highly recommend reaching out. Support Forecast Pro, Aiden Goldman. It's been a huge help to us in getting all this set up.
All right. Thank you, Brendan. So all of this, the stuff, the behind the scenes stuff, that's maybe not as fun or as, interesting. What it does is frees up hours and hours and hours of your weekly time in order to do forecasting, which is, what you need to be doing is analyzing the data and actually doing forecasting. So what we've seen as a result of that data automation is more time to forecast, so more time to spend in the models by breaking up the projects. That last step that Brendan talked about, the recalculation time of the software went, from a minute or 2 minutes or sometimes 3 minutes down to seconds. So you can see we can do hundreds and hundreds of more iterations on any particular forecast, and it allows us to do a lot more forecasting. And when we implemented this and got everything going and got the data automated and flowing and getting us a lot more time to forecast, we saw an immediate improvement to our forecasting error. So it went from about 27% down to 12%. And that was just fantastic. That was a huge way to help improve your supply planning, is to have a more accurate forecast. And that's kind of the baseline for the entire process, which we'll talk about here in a second. But that's what everyone wants to see, a more accurate forecast. But if you had a statistics brain, kind of like I do, you see the variation around the error has decreased by a lot as well. And this is what I think is most helpful. From week to week, this is a weekly forecast at the aggregate level, is what the error we're looking at here is. So from week to week, we are a lot more reliable. There's not going to be huge swings in forecast error like we saw before this process. And it makes you much more reliable and much more trustworthy when you go to share your forecasts with the downstream users of it, your supply chain, your finance, your production. And it builds a lot of credibility. And I think that's one of the most challenging part working in as a forecaster. Sometimes you don't, it's like a thankless job sometimes, but the more you can do to build that credibility, the better. And we've seen some fantastic improvements from that. And now Caleb does a lot of work with integrating the forecasts into our supply chain planning. And he's going to walk you through how we do some of that.
Thanks, Blake. So, after you've kind of built out this forecasting process, you've improved the accuracy, that's really only the first step of, taking the forecast from kind of a passive number to something that actually positively drives your organization. So when you don't have a forecast or you don't have an accurate forecast, people tend to make their own forecasts still. So, maybe they use a simple moving average, or they do same as last year, or they, do their gut feel of what they think is going to happen. And as I'm sure there is in a number of your organizations, even if you have implemented this foolproof, forecasting process, people still tend to trust their institutional knowledge over your forecast. So, the thing that we've really worked on the last couple of years is really to prove out the accuracy of the forecast. So we do that by sharing a lot of data with everyone. So we share kind of your typical, forecasting metrics, the MAPE, the MAD, that type of stuff. But we also break it down into terms that are easier for non-forecasting people to understand. So we show aggregate percentages, absolute volumes for the upcoming periods, what that means as far as the year-over-year increase. And doing that and breaking it down in that way really allows you to point out the various drivers of the forecast, seasonality and trend, that's what's causing the numbers to show what they are, but also, dive into things like promotions, new brands, new markets, et cetera. And all of that allows you to create more buy-in to the forecast so that people aren't creating their own plans separately from what the forecast is. So for example, if there's a given spike coming up in a week, explaining to people that that's seasonality and trend, and it's not that much different than what we've seen in the past, it really gives some confidence in those numbers. And breaking it down that way really allows you to get more feedback, especially from the sales side of your organization, allows them to understand that this is probably a pretty good number because we've been seeing a downward trend over the last couple of years. And then it also, the main thing, it finally creates more consensus on the validity of the upcoming forecast. So they're not thinking that, you say X and they're thinking, well, I actually think it's going to be something completely different, and they plan differently. And that really allows you to kick off the S&OP process. Go next slide, Blake. So for those that are not familiar with S&OP, S&OP stands for Sales and Operations Planning. And at the basic level, that basically is the sales side of the organization getting together with your operations side to make sure that they are in alignment on the upcoming plan for sales and production. And for us, because we've created a pretty streamlined forecast process and a fairly accurate forecast, the forecast has really become the heart of that process to really drive those plans. So once you have buy-in on what that demand is going to be, it really allows everyone to kind of use the same playbook to make better decisions. So instead of people making their own raw material with safety stocks, they kind of use the forecast to set those appropriately. And so that'll help you improve decision-making processes on your raw materials and WIP, your capacity planning, labor planning, CapEx decisions. You can use that then for revenue forecasting with your finance team, and allows your sales team to see where we need to do any demand smoothing. So for example, if you want to go to the next slide, Blake, for our production team, we created this capacity dashboard, shows here, that it lays out our forecast over the next so many months by week, which is kind of how our production team plans their schedules, lays it out by week, and it pinpoints anything that's over that orange line, which is kind of their theoretical capacity. And by seeing that and by them having trust in that forecast, they can do things, problem solve ahead of time to say, okay, do we need to pre-build inventory to make sure that we can meet that demand? Is there ways for us to increase capacity with labor or CapEx decisions, or ultimately just have to go back to sales and say, no, we have to smooth out that demand or we're not going to meet it. And all of this really results in, the ultimate goal for everyone is better fulfillment rates. And I'll kick that back over to Blake now, and he's going to talk about some of the successes that we've seen with fulfillment and our process.
Yeah, I think one other thing on this slide is when you have an accurate forecast, you can also identify the gaps in your upcoming capacity. So here we have a look 4 weeks out, 13 weeks out, 26 weeks out, 52 weeks out. So now when you know you have open capacity at your facility, then you can go back to sales, and when they have an opportunity, you have a better chance of getting more sales. So a forecast can, lead to better supply planning, but it also can lead to more opportunities for your sales team as well. So great job explaining all that, Caleb. And like he said, what you hope that happens is that this leads to better customer service. Basically, that's the end-all be-all metric for any organization. And what we've seen, this is the same year from 2018 to 2019. We improved the forecast. We better integrated it into supply planning. We gained that buy-in. We have more teams working off the same set of numbers, creating safety stock numbers off of the forecasts that are more accurate. And what we've seen is a fulfillment increase of 6 points. That doesn't seem like a lot. We already had really good fulfillment, but we always beat ourselves up and try to get better, So 0.6 points doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're $1 billion industry, that's, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. So looking at this again, with your if you got a stats brain like I do, you see the variation as well. So now when you're going back to your customers and having conversations with them, you don't have these huge swings of service where your service was horrible for a few weeks in a row, or you had one big week of the bad gets just not quite as bad. You're more consistent, and that helps build relationships with your customers as well. You're more reliable, and when you're more reliable, that creates more sales for you. So it's great for the organization. It's great from all the way upstream and all the way downstream. And this is one of the main benefits we've been able to achieve by using a more accurate forecast in our supply planning process. So to wrap it up here. Basically to improve supply planning is just to get a more accurate forecast. And Forecast Pro's really helped out a lot with that. And the reason we've been able to get an accurate forecast is because of Forecast Pro, and also because we've been able to automate things. So we've automated all of the mundane and manual tasks that you normally would have to do with moving data around and making sure data is accurate and all that. We've automated that. And what that does is frees up your time to spend time doing what you are best at, which is making the forecast more accurate. So once you have that accurate forecast, again, it's all about building credibility within the organization. And that comes with just constant nagging and sharing of information and sharing of forecasts and sharing that your forecast is accurate and all of that stuff to prove out that, if we use this forecasting, it can help the organization as a whole. So once you prove that, you can gain consensus and insert it into your S&OP process and start doing a lot more cross-functional planning and integration, and ultimately improve supply planning. So that's our story for the day. We also got some other brands here, some interesting stuff to further display some of the packaging complexities, some different bottle types and some variety packs and things like that. So if you ever see our brands out in the marketplace, grab them. If you have any questions for me, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me, send me a message. I can try to, help out however I can. And if you want to learn more about our beer, let me know. We know the reason we're in this business is because we're passionate about our beer. So let us know about that as well. And I think that's all we had for today. And we'll go back to Sarah to talk some Forecast Pro stuff.
Thank you very much. So I definitely did see some brands that I might be interested in, or products I might be interested in trying on that previous slide. So that's good.
We launched Massachusetts a few years ago, so you should be able to pick it up.
Oh, actually, I have a mini keg of Bells sitting in our lake house right now. So
that's a fun one.
It's good. Okay, so as mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, a recording of today's webinar will be posted on forecastpro.com. You'll be receiving a link to that recording sometime next week. While you're on the website, we really do encourage you to take a look at some of our previous webinars. There's 20-25 hours of material up there covering a really broad range of topics. So it's a really great resource to learn a little bit more about forecasting. And incidentally, this is part of a quarterly educational series. So our next webinar is planned for October, and at this point we have not chosen a topic. And I believe when you leave this webinar, there is a survey, and you can make suggestions for topics. And we definitely take a look at those, and we'll take into account suggestions when we do plan that October webinar. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have traditionally held a lot of methodology workshops. So for the last couple of years, we've run a couple a year in places like Orlando and San Francisco, and it was a fun 3 days of learning about forecast methodology and how to use that in Forecast Pro. So that doesn't seem to be on the table right now. So we are going to online workshops. The material that we're covering in these online workshops is consistent with what we've done in previous methodology workshops. So it really focuses in on all the different methodologies that you can use while you're forecasting, the pros and cons of those. And we show a lot of real data. We'll take a look at your real data. Incidentally, when we were planning these workshops, we talked about whether we should call them seminars or workshops. And based on some quick research, it appears that workshops are supposed to be more interactive. So that's actually why we went with workshops over seminars, because our hope is that these online workshops are as interactive as possible and are as close to being in person as we can make them. So our first workshop is actually next week. There actually are a couple of spots still open for next week's workshop. We also are holding one the 3rd week of August. That one actually is quickly getting full, and we've recently added one for the 3rd week of September. And again, that's because our August one is approaching capacity at this point. But definitely, if you're interested, you can get more information at forecastpro.com/events, and feel free to reach out to anybody here at BFS as well with any questions you might have about these workshops. Next slide, please. Okay, and we had been planning on having a user conference in September 2020, something else that we had to put off a little bit. And in contrast to the workshops, the user conference really is about making connections, meeting people, learning a lot from different users. And given that, it did not seem like something that we should take online. So instead of doing that, we have postponed it by a year, but we are planning and have reserved the space for September 2021. It is in Cambridge, Massachusetts again. So the actual conference will be held at a MIT facility, and we have some rooms reserved at a nearby hotel as well. So it's always been a great time for us, and at this point you are able to sign up for that user conference, and again we're giving you the URL that you can get some more information on our website. And if you're at all worried still about signing up for in-person events like this, even well into 2021, we do have a you can cancel your reservation up to a month before. So up to August 2021, it's a cancelable reservation. So please check it out. And next slide, please. So our software. So we just saw Caleb, I believe, Caleb go through the Forecast Pro software a bit. That was their version 6, which I hope the users that are listening now have upgraded to version 6. I prefer the user interface, certainly. But if you're not a current user of Forecast Pro, we would love to show you a demo. You can download a trial version on forecastpro.com. You can call us to ask about it. You can email us. And if you want to submit or if you want a live demo, you can also submit your request as a question right now. So with that, I believe our next slide is for Q&A, correct, Blake?
I think so.
Okay, and we have had a lot of questions come in. The first one is certainly a relevant thing right now. How has COVID-19 impacted your business, and how have you accounted for it in Forecast Pro?
It's impacted our business a lot. One of the interesting things is that we've seen kind of one-for-one trade-offs. So it matters where you're asking the question. So some of our brands, like I said, we brew a beer and we package it into many different package types. Some of our brands, that top-level volume has basically stayed the same. What we've lost is what we call on-premise. So bars and restaurants have shut down. So what we sell to them is kegs of beer. And that basically went down to 0. But now all these people still want to drink some good beer, but now they're going to the grocery store. So we saw kind of a one-for-one shift to cases of beer that we're selling to grocery stores. So that hasn't been the case for every brand. Some brands have fallen off dramatically in total. Some brands have taken off. We tried to launch a new brand right at the start of COVID-19. We launched it in February, and that took a kind of a rocky start as a new brand, but it's kind of picking up steam now. But what we found, using Forecast Pro, we were able to quickly adjust our forecasts. So the forecasts we send to production we're locked out with a time fence. Obviously, we lock it out. We do 4-week planning cycle, so we lock it out in 4 weeks. So we had a couple of really rocky weeks where the forecast accuracy was pretty bad, but we were able to quickly, add some overrides, start really heavy leveraging the event modeling capabilities in Forecast Pro to call out when that COVID-19 event started and kind of project out how long we think that event's going to last. But I think our forecast accuracy year to date, that MAPE graph that I showed, we've ticked up to 14% this year, where we were at 12% last year. So we've been able to really keep up. And, outside of, locking things out of our time fence, we've been able to adjust and quickly get back to a pretty accurate forecast.
Excellent. So another question on new products. So how do you approach new product modeling when you don't have any sales data? And in particular, how might you integrate some of your social data that you mentioned into that new product process?
So I don't know, Brendan, do you want to take this one? I can take it if you want to.
So we've looked at a lot of ways to carve up new products, and it still is kind of an ongoing situation for us because it's not easy. A lot of times what we've done is we've done like analogous forecasting. I know Forecast Pro's done some webinars on that, but we've kind of seen what some of our other products have done. We've leveraged, so some of the new products fall into certain areas where we're trying to target, specific consumers. And with some of that syndicated data, we're able to look at, what, that kind of arena is doing and kind of get a feel for where's that trending and is there any seasonality of sorts that we can just pepper into the model as well. But as far as social interaction right now, we haven't used that too much in integrating into new product forecasting.
It's really just the social data is more monitoring as we launch a new product, because before you ship it, obviously there's not going to be much social interaction on it. But after you start shipping it, it can help determine if the product is getting good ratings, then it's probably gonna going to stick around. And like Brendan said, we use that analogous. We forecast, we work with our sales team to get a pre-order type of initial volume, and there's a launch curve is what we call it, where you have a load-in period and you settle off at a certain percentage of the spike, and then you kind of forecast a flat forecast until you start seeing some trends upward or downward. But before we have shipments, we leverage the forecast by analogy a lot in Forecast Pro, and then after we have shipments, we leverage the component models a lot. So we allow the component model to drive the level of the forecast, but we fix the seasonality based on like brands. So we fix what the seasonality is going to be and let the component model drive where the level and trends go. So a lot of good tools in Forecast Pro that help us do that, but they're always a mystery, right? You never know what's going to happen. It's always a challenge.
True enough. So we have another question about the adjustments made to your forecasts. So do you have a final consensus meeting? And if so, what is the forecast value add of any of those adjustments made?
So this is a kind of a funny one. When we first started using Forecast Pro, this is a new tool. We don't know how well it's going to perform. So we are actively pushing our sales team to adjust forecasts. So we know from the bat, right off the bat, from statistical that I explained to our baseline where we do the forecast analyst adjustments, we have a lot of value add in that step. That's a big chunk of value add, reduces error a lot. But what we didn't know was that can we get any lower, and how much could the sales team help out with that? So we showed where the portal where the sales team can log in and adjust the forecast. And right off the bat, we found that a lot of them were making the forecast a lot worse. And we were using forecast value add as a metric for the sales team when we should have been using forecast accuracy as a metric for the sales team. So we really scaled back the adjustments from the sales team, and really if it's going to affect demand any less than like even 20%, they shouldn't even touch it, because the stat models are going to correct. We're going to catch them at a high aggregate level with our analyst adjustments. So really, we found that if it's above 20%, that's when the sales team needs to be interjecting, and that's when we get value from them. But yeah, with a demand review consensus meeting, we try to just share as much as we can out there. We've just started a process where we added another meeting. Yay, more meetings! But I think it's a good one where we meet with the sales and marketing team before we present the forecast to the sales and operations planning team. So before, we were just kind of having all that meeting lumped into one, and there's just a lot of back and forth. And now with this meeting, what we hope is that we gain consensus within sales and marketing first. We have a unified message that now you're just presenting what the expected plan is to the supply team, and then they can just see if they can execute on it, basically, instead of having that back and forth of which forecast looks right and wrong. So forecast value add plays a major role specifically for the forecasting team, but we honestly don't talk a whole lot about it in the sales and operations planning meetings.
Okay, so we have another question about price and promotions. So how are price changes or sales promotions taken into account in the forecasting process?
I think Caleb has done quite a bit of work on this. Maybe you can speak to that and give you a chance.
Yeah, so in the past, we've kind of leveraged, in Forecast Pro anyways, we've leveraged the event modeling. So if we have, what they call post-offs at the distributor level, where a distributor will discount cases $1 or something, we've been able to tag those. So let's say we do one every June, let's say, and you tag that event that that distributor did that said post off there, and then if they are going to do a similar type post off or something like that in the future, we can tag that into the future months to then elevate that forecast. That's kind of how we've handled a lot of them. To be honest, we don't do a lot of that kind of with the forecast, because there's so many of them going on across the country. It's hard to kind of aggregate them up. But that's kind of how we've handled getting that most accurate forecast with it before. So.
And we have kind of higher level marketing planning as well, where they'll do like a sweepstakes where, you know, you post on our website and everyone who buys a case of beer can log in and sign up for a sweep, or I don't know how they work exactly. But we know that they happen and we know that they affect sales. And so we can just, you know, go in and put an aggregate. If it hasn't happened before, we can, you know, put a 10% adjustment because that's what we think. But a lot of them, and I don't know how it works for a lot of other companies, but they do the same things every year. So every November, they'll do an on-premise drive for whatever brand. And what we found is that the stat modeling and Forecast Pro picks that up, and it does a really good job at modeling at. It's basically seasonality at this point when they do it every year. So it's good. It's really good to know if it's a recurring marketing promotion or if it's an ad hoc marketing promotion, and you kind of have to attack it differently within the software, within the forecast.
Yeah. And I would also add there's also is the squeeze worth the juice at a certain point? You know, so if we know something new is coming up in, you know, the spring or the fall that is going to elevate the forecast, there might be easier to manage it with safety stocks on the supply side versus us spending hours trying to determine what the exact lift is going to be over that time period. But that's just kind of the capacity where our team's at. It just doesn't make sense. So.
Okay, and I think we have time for one final question. So with so many items, how do your salespeople check the forecast for each SKU? Are they working in dollars? And if so, how do they convert from units to dollars?
So the salespeople, when they go to adjust the forecast, it's not very often that they do. If they have a big promotion coming up, or if they landed a new set of key accounts where they're adding 100 different stores within their territory, what we do is we often just have a conversation with them. And, you know, we put those adjustments in with the forecast analyst adjustments typically. But they still do have the ability to go in and adjust their own forecast. We are a small, I will say small, maybe mid-size, privately held company. So basically everything we do is in volume. So we don't have, we have all our pricing tables where we have product and different customer pricing, and we can convert everything to pricing, but mostly we just work in volume is how we talk. But I think there's some improvement potential there to look at some things when you're making some decisions from the sales forecasting perspective, to make the right margin decision, not just the right volume decision. So we've been incorporating a lot of that as well. And with a more accurate forecast and with, you know, our pricing tables integrated, we can start to make those decisions as well. So mostly in volume, and, you know, mostly communicated back to us rather than them making those adjustments themselves.
As Blake mentioned earlier, you know, we try to get the best forecast value add, and we want to, as analysts, reduce our time doing kind of mundane tasks. Well, similarly, the sales team, if we have them constantly going in and clicking through every single model with minimal to no or even negative value add, we kind of pull the plug on that, and we've kind of reconditioned them to go in and adjust when it's big, meaningful changes, so as to get the most optimal use out of their time, because they are salespeople, so their job is to go sell, not necessarily do the forecasting. So like, to Blake's point, you know, they come and communicate to us when something big happens, like a giant beer festival just got booked for us. Well, that's pretty impactful, so we need to make sure we have the beer available for that. Or, you know, they're doing a quick one-off on one particular product, and, you know, this zip code, it's not going to be enough to really buck the trend either way. To Caleb's point, we just see some safety stock to cover that situation.
That's a good point. I forgot to mention that the automation that we've done has freed up our time, but to Brendan's point, it's also freed up the salespeople time. We're spending a lot of time forecasting, and I don't know how many FTEs we've added back to the sales team. That's one of the metrics we looked at too. Just because the amount of hours they were spending forecasting before has basically gone down to zero. So we freed up their time, and now while we freed up our time to do forecasting like we get to do, we freed up their time to sell beer, which is what they want to do. They don't want to spend time in front of the computer. So that's been a great impact as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think that we're at the end of our hour two. Thank you so much, Blake, Brendan, and Caleb. It was really interesting and insightful. And thank you, everyone who joined us. And we hope you join us at that our October webinar as well.
Yeah, thanks for hosting and thanks everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, everyone.